Yes, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Podcast. I have finally gained my mutiny, my Canadian mutiny, and I am hosting again. So I hope you guys can deal with us through this. It'll be an interesting one. But Alex, how you doing, mate? You're in Dubai. Tell the
I am in
people.
Dubai. I am in Dubai. I woke up at 5 Dubai time today because we got so delayed. Yeah, one of the worst flights of my life. It was
How long
my
is that
mum.
flight?
It's 6.5 hours, which
Wow.
is not fun anyway. My mum was
Hmm.
sick into a cup next to me. I hope she wouldn't mind me saying because she was on one of the plane. Dude next to me he had his arm. You have two armrests, right? You can't
He
have
took the
them
middle.
both. You've got to choose one. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like, say, there was four of us. And my sister had this one, then there's this other dude, and then me and then my mum. And he
Hmm.
had both of them. I'm like, you got to choose one, mate. You can't have both. Bless her, there was a small kid having a bit of a anxiety attack, and the flight
Oh
was
my
delayed by
God.
like 4 hours. So it was just today's been an absolute write-off. I was just in
Wow.
bed all day.
Everything bar a
Um,
partridge in a pear tree there. You've got everything in terms of flight issues that
yeah, yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
But
Just
look,
needed is there a doctor on the plane? And then we would have had the full house.
there,
But
there you go.
yeah,
Did you guys ever do like Airplane? You ever see that comedy down in the UK? It was like a satire comedy on
airplane. No,
Airplane. No, okay. Well, you're gonna have
is
to
that the
watch
one
that.
where he has all the lines like
Yeah,
the like oh
and
don't call me Shirley.
sure, yeah, exactly
Yeah,
that
okay, I've
one.
seen that. I've seen it. I've seen the bits of it. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Well, obscure American reference check, hosting duties check.
yeah.
And so,
Done.
look, we will get into the football. You're probably screaming your mics at this point. Look, we've got a big game to talk about. Brighton. I thought Brighton was incredible, mate. I mean, a couple records there. I think it was something the first time in 32 games that Brighton haven't scored. I look at a way that Brighton was dominated, and I know we kind of talked this on the instant reaction, but I felt Mikel was willing this win. I saw a level of intensity from the sidelines that was going beyond the normal. Like, I really feel Mikel takes things personally, and he almost, the Michael Jordan documentary, my favorite thing to quote, but that part where he kind of talks about trying to get little games in his head to get himself up to a level
Hmm.
where he'll make up
Yep.
a lie or something.
Yep.
Not that I
Yep.
feel Mikel does that, but he might. And I just feel he
Yeah. Or he'll
takes
he'll
it
take a
personally.
tiny thing.
Yes.
Someone saying, "Oh, you're not really sick," and then he'll just go right.
I mean, clear example was the kickabout with the
Yeah.
boys, but that was justified. But still, I
Yeah.
think he does that. And there was a level
Hmm.
of this guy De Zerbi has had me for a
Yeah.
while. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
want to leave no doubt. And for me, left no doubt. But what did you make of the game, kind of in general, on our approach and how we dominated, really?
Do you know what's crazy? You might just see me counting them. It's so mad that game against Brighton at home last season was 7 months ago.
Yeah.
Considering also, I think at that point, apart from Saliba and Tomiyasu, obviously, we had most of the team available, that we had at the time, considering, where we were in the season, considering, the form that we were in, at points last season. It's just so crazy to me that was only 7 months ago because it
Mhm.
just was a completely different occasion.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that the way we approached the game was it was befitting of a team that is expecting to go to quarterfinals of Champions Leagues, to go to semifinals of Champions Leagues, to go to title winning teams. And last season I felt as though against Brighton, I think possibly we may have approached the game differently with Saliba or Tomiyasu, but I think it was such a good. I said on the instant reaction, right?
Mhm.
Like if you were going to describe an Arsenal game this season, or sort of find the apotheosis of Arsenal this season, a lot of that game against Brighton, other than maybe the chance creation overall this season, was the perfect example. It was a little bit kind of patchy finishing, really solid defensively, being adaptable in how we pressed. Today last weekend was one way, and the weekend before was another. But it was a real kind of and how we battled individually in terms of the duels, how the players turned up, just all these things. It felt like a real Arsenal 23-24 season where we just found game where we just found a way of getting it over the line. And look, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the moment and caught up in the win and caught up in what that is, which was great. And we should get into how exactly we did that. But I also want to draw everyone's attention to just think back to that game, how we approached that game in a much less dominant way only 7 months ago. How we approached that game from a pressing situation, how we approached that game in terms of the duels, and how we got out fought, how we got out muscled, how we got out thought as well. All those things, and neither time were we in sort of the perfect situation, because you're never going to be.
Mm.
So what's exciting is that Mikel has gone, we're not in the perfect situation. We have got injuries, we've got this, that, and the other. We've got games thick and fast, whatever, Anfield next weekend, but we're still going to come at you. We are still going to, and I think also the PSV midweek probably did help. But I was so impressed by the approach to the game, which is so exciting.
Me too. Likewise, it was the intensity, and I will transition to that intensity because it was stark. It was something he's learning from Bhavs. It is
very good.
Thank you. But the press, mate, like for me, that was the biggest difference. The amount of times that we've pressed man to man this season has been the biggest change that I honestly, by the way, don't feel that is being talked about on the timeline whatsoever. When we talk about Arsenal 2022 and 2023 and compare it to Arsenal 23-24, the biggest change has to be the press. When you look at last season, the PPDA numbers, when you look at the amount of high turnovers that we created, we were playing a much more high octane style of football. Now I find we mix it up zonally quite a bit more. We're doing so, maybe people could argue from a conservative standpoint, do we need to conserve ourselves later in the season? That's valid. But I think the approach to doing that means that you're more defensively secure, you're more willing to build up wide. And I think just in general, when you look at the numbers, we created 11 high turnovers, 3 of which are leading to a shot. Brighton only completed 3 high turnovers, 1 leading to a shot. And I think that's significant because you're talking about a Brighton team that do press, a Brighton team that I would argue one of their best qualities is build-up, and very few people meet them in build-up. In fact, many people stand off them into a mid-block and just concede and say, listen, you're brilliant. Let me cut off the
As
pace.
we did in May.
Yeah, as we did in May. And I think that for me is the biggest maybe bookend from last year to this year, because we saw a return to last year's style, but in a different way. And it was brilliant. But like, what did you make of the press? What did you make of our return to kind of the 1v1, let's meet you?
Yeah. What I love about Brighton, and what I've been so impressed by them, is how they connect inside once they're being pressed. They have this. I don't know. I'm just, I'd need to watch more to be able to sort of understand the real specifics. But I think the general idea, I get the sense from watching Brighton, is that you get pushed to the wide areas with Lewis Dunk, or you get pushed to the wide areas with Van Heck, whoever it is. But the players, whether it's Gross or McAllister, like I said last season, or whoever it is, are coming inside for that kind of wall pass or knock around the corner to a Matoma or to whoever. And that's how you bypass the team. That's how you get 8 of the opposition's players sat high pressing you. That's what they do. You go and high press them, you press them up. They can connect inside so incredibly. They win that battle, get it around the corner, and they're away. And we just did not allow them to do that. I mean, they tried loads of times, but I was so impressed, and that's what I loved. It was not only how high we were engaging them, it's that we were wise to what they were trying to do. We wouldn't let them knock it around the corner. It's the little adaptations, and that's really what I wanted to say was, you're right. Last season was much more of a high octane, general, not always, but 95% of the time, especially towards the beginning of the season, we were pressing pretty high. We're trying to win it back, early, getting teams to knock it long and winning it back with Saliba and Gabriel and building through the thirds. Fine, clear idea. But we've spoken about before on the channel, right? Like how the football is adapting. Because one week against Manchester United, we can go, do you know what? We're going to sit back. We're going to allow you to knock it long to us. We don't want it. We think this could, we don't want this to become a transitional game. That's how we're going to do it. Against Crystal Palace, player goes off. Okay, we're going to adapt our shape and change how we engage you. We're not going to engage you. We're going to sit here, whatever, in a block. Okay, against Brighton, we actually are going to press you. Or, against City, okay, we're going to press Nathan Ake's weak foot. That's the one place that we're going to, that's our pressing trigger. People are going to see it differently. People are going to have different thoughts on it or whatever. But the adaptation from game to game to game to game to game, for me, when I watch it, is the most exciting thing. Because Mikel can look at an opposition and say, I have all the tools, I have all the principles. We try and win our duels every single game. We try and, sit in the 4-4-2 block at times in every game. But little things, where we press, at what trigger it is, how high is the line of engagement, those little things he can adjust from game to game to game and thwart oppositions. And that's why, that's why our defensive record is so good. But that's also why teams are so they find it so hard to create chances against us. So hard. I mean, what was it? One really at the end?
Really, one.
That one chance
Yeah,
against
it
Brighton.
was
Right,
João
it's
Pedro, right?
amazing.
At the end where
Right.
they finally string together a couple passes. But when I had a look just technically at the press, we vacated the middle, mate, excessively. Like we really committed to forcing Brighton to try to attempt to break us down out wide, but also if there was a spot in the middle, we could be outdone. And the one thing that drew me a lot of confidence, at least, was the Gabriel Saliba performance to back up that press, because it's not just the individuals that we're doing right now, where we're asking Jesus, Saka, Martinelli to really go 1v1 in this game, but it was
Mm,
that press from the back that really meant any outball in terms of Verbruggen trying to go over the top was met with just a towering header and us collecting
mm,
second balls. And
yeah.
there was just an inevitability to us receiving possession if
Yep.
they were to ever to get one, and it was playing with our food. I really felt it was that way, and I don't feel that we've seen that enough. Particularly for me, Spurs and United were two games where I had wanted to see this kind of style. I thought it was really important going forward because we're going to talk now about injuries in terms of sustainability. And maybe this is
Mm,
a lesson that we've learned from last season, because you have a look at our injuries in total, mate. You've got Partey, you've got Timber out, both of which are on slightly different timescales. But you've got Ben White, who right now is definitely nursing an injury. We know that. In addition to Tomiyasu already out injured. Um, you know, our bench, Vieira, also injured as well.
mm,
We don't
mm,
have, I think, El Neni, but I don't want to really say him because he's not part of the squad necessarily, but still. And Jorginho was ill. But again, like we're looking at a bench right now that isn't healthy necessarily. And just the manner in which we've been able to adapt to injuries as a whole is, I think, a very good bookend from last season. And it doesn't have to
mm,
just be in the most recent time. We can look back in terms of how we dealt with the Jesus injury, how we dealt with Zinchenko at the start of the season, how we dealt with Thomas Partey the entirety of this season. I mean, if you go back to each of our last two seasons consecutively, injuries to our buildup have derailed our season. And it's
mm,
not as though we haven't had injuries to our buildup this season, but we haven't let it derail us. And
mm,
I think that's been the biggest difference, or at least one of the biggest confidence that I've taken away. Because you compare that to Brighton, who themselves had a long injury list. And I think we made them look poor more than, let's just say, we could blame a lack of quality on their part. I think we did a brilliant job ourselves with our own quality. But
mm,
the manner in which other teams have been unable to deal with injuries in the manner that we have has been a key theme. And we'll get into a little bit later
mm,
about some returning players and what that may mean. But for you, what do you make of kind of the Arsenal's resilience to injury, the
mm.
resilience to kind of losing people?
Well, I don't think it can be divorced from the first conversation we had. That ability to adapt isn't all. Yes, it's dictated a lot to by the opposition, but it's also dictated by, okay, well, if we have to get through a game where Ben White is maybe at 60%,
Mm-hmm.
then let's approach our right sided attacking play slightly differently because we can. That's the exciting thing. It's like, we don't have to be at 100% in every area, every single game, as I think we had to be towards, generally towards the beginning of last season. Everyone had to be firing on their A game, giving 100%. I think that's partly why it all kind of slightly fell down at the end. I'm oversimplifying, but, broad brushstrokes, I think that is a decent rule of thumb. So, I don't think those things can be divorced. And you can say, okay, well, this player is unavailable today, or that player is unavailable today, or so and so's nursing an injury. Can you get through the game? Can you not? And then it almost feels like the approach of how we play can be almost the last question, which is lovely because I think beforehand it's felt like, right, here's how Arsenal play. Here's how Arsenal play. We've got to stick to the principles. I always feel like with Mikel this season, he's been so rigid, and is still slightly rigid in certain things, I think. But I have seen a little bit more of an opening up and a bit more of an adaptation because he can. And, maybe we look back when we're, writing our book on the Arteta Arsenal period, and we say that, we were wrong when we used to call him too rigid or too ideological about certain things, because actually he was just waiting until he had the tools. And I wouldn't be surprised. We've seen this season Mikel begin to adapt and change things. Put Declan Rice at centre back, pre-planning a sort of future thing. He even said it.
It's
A
proactive, isn't
pre-planning
it?
a future where that's going to have to happen. And I think when you come into a club as Mikel did, I've been watching a lot of Mark Goldbridge's content recently because I think he's really fascinating, and I think there's loads of reasons I think he's brilliant, but I think he's interesting, and just hearing about Man United's struggles, you do think back to that Arsenal, sort of 2019, 2020 situation. And what you need is, and the reason I mention him is he said at some point, and we're seeing the beginning of something with Erik ten Hag, where it sounds like there was an issue with Varane. Varane went out the team a couple of weeks. He came back in, and he's now performing again. So, when you have that sort of level of control over a club, as Mikel had to create, you have to set very hard boundaries. Culture is the hardest thing to create, because culture is what do you do when the manager's not looking? And that's something that Mikel has had to implement into the club, and that's taken years and years and years and years and years. Now, I think we're at a point, both on and off the pitch, where Mikel can start to trust people a little bit more, start to be a little bit more, maybe if that Aubameyang thing happens, maybe he isn't dropped, Aubameyang now, maybe Saka isn't dropped for the North London derby. You know what I'm saying? Because you can be, once you've got your, ducks in a row, you can start to change it around a little bit. And I think we're seeing that both on and off the pitch. And I think that's really the exciting thing. And I think with the injuries, that they make it less problematic to have the type of injuries that we've had, because we can go, do you know what, we have so many things at our disposal now, we can start to move around a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think, though, that freedom to move is something that maybe our rivals aren't feeling in general as a whole. I mean, when I have a look at Manchester City, which is, by the way, a very fascinating study right now, number-wise, statistically, they're not changed. Like, a lot of people are talking about how this Man City have declined, and this narrative that they've declined. In fact, most of their numbers have actually improved a little bit in terms of defensively, in terms of chance creative wise. They're on par with what they were doing last season as well. Their numbers don't indicate a decline or a drop off whatsoever. Now, we all know injuries have played a role. The lack of Rodri, has been huge to what we perceive as maybe a weaker City. I think something they haven't got a result in the last 6. Right? So when you're talking about it, there's a vulnerability to City through injury. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is I think Liverpool have their very own injury sick bed in Thiago coming back. We've got, of course, our own in Thomas Partey, but also Timber, I think, has to go into that equation, because he was bought as a pillar. He wasn't bought as a squad player. He was bought as a starting level talent. So he is, for me at least, a huge kind of part of the calculus. For you, who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose from an injury perspective in the run-in?
Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To hear the full episode, sign up as a YouTube member on this channel or go to patreon.com/thecannonpod.